What if it came out that Blake Lively's new team member, Mr. Nick Shapiro of the CIA, was actually involved in covering up things like SA, ending of people's lives, and worse, if you can believe it, for a company called Airbnb? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about. I exposed Nick Shapiro in a previous video for his work with the CIA and essentially being in control of narrative control, painting narratives in a way that ultimately benefited government, that ultimately manipulated the public to work on your subconscious mind to get you to buy into a narrative that benefited the powers that be. And you're not going to believe what this man was involved with when he left the government. We're going to start with short-term rentals. I have some articles here and we are going to go deeper. This is just my first look at this, an expose on this. Now, I originally, when I was looking into Nick Shapiro, saw this mentioned and didn't look into it much. I had put like a little pin in it, as I like to say, to come back to it tonight. And as soon as I sat down, I was sitting down, I was going to have a hot chocolate and then go visit my animals, hang out with my animals on the farm. And as soon as I started digging, I thought, we just have to start diving in and we will explore this as we go. We will go deeper in time over this because it needs to be known, I believe, who Blake has on her team now, defending her and curating narratives that you are going to be picking up in mainstream media. And it is my belief that this is why she's trying to shut down content creators. Comments are disappearing from people's posts. I'll respond to someone on one of my posts, it disappears. Content literally is disappearing. Content creators aren't able to post. Their ability to leave comments is being taken away. Bots are in overdrive right now. And it seems very convenient that at the same time that Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds brought on some CIA guy that is known for crisis management and manipulating narratives, hiding SHSA, people ending other people's lives. It is horrific. This rabbit hole is only being brought up because Blake brought this man on. I said it in my previous video, her bringing him on was the worst PR mistake she could have ever made because now people are looking into him. And if nothing else, people are going to trust Blake and her narrative even less. And she's going to come across as someone that is manipulative and trying to persuade you because she doesn't have what she needs. She doesn't have the smoking gun. So now she's got to bring in this guy to control the narrative and shut down content creators. Oh, baby. My blood pressure is already through the roof. Let's go. This is Nick Shapiro here, former global head of crisis management at Airbnb. Airbnb black box team pays guests and hosts millions after incidents in rental properties. We're going to go through a couple of articles here just to set the stage. But if you've learned nothing else from this channel, and welcome if you're new to the channel, my name is Ashley Brianna Eve. We investigate pop culture, power, and media manipulation here. If you've learned nothing else from this channel, one thing I hope you learn and take away is that once I'm onto something, I don't like to step away. I will follow those threads. I mean, call it ADHD hyperfixation, if you will, because I do have ADHD and I certainly do have hyperfixation, but I will keep going and I will keep following these threads. All right, let's read this. Reports have revealed that Airbnb, and now this is from June 17th, 2021. Reports have revealed that Airbnb has been spending approximately $50 million a year to keep serious incidents in its rentals out of the press through a use of a black box team. The cash has been given to both hosts and guests, so they will not imply responsibility or liability on Airbnb. These payments came through the form of blank checks that are provided to members of the black box team by the company, which went public in December. The black box consists of around 100 agents across the world. Many of these agents include those in military or emergency service backgrounds. Nick Shapiro, pictured above, former National Security Council advisor to former President Barack Obama and deputy chief of staff at the CIA, we've already covered that, was among those hired to the team. He has since left his position as global head of crisis management at Airbnb. So we know from my previous video that he left and he started his own company. He has described his experience with the black box as similar to the White House Situation Room. So covering up death, SH, like, okay, all right. Okay. Just expose what's done at the White House. Okay. Shapiro said, I remember thinking I was right back in the thick of it. This brought me back to feelings of confronting truly horrific matters at Langley and in the Situation Room at the White House. During the pandemic, 25 members of the team were laid off after CEO Brian Chesky announced that about half of Airbnb staff would be let go in May 2020, which received pushback from agents. However, 15 of these workers were hired again. They were given time and a half pay. All right, we go down here. Agents described meeting with hosts who had found human remains, and guess who had to hide and run from perpetrators while they were staying in an Airbnb? Oh, we'll go up one. Actually, I missed this. In interviews with Bloomberg Business Week, former members of the team described their role. The agents said they provide support to those who had encountered or experienced events such as SH, death. Agents also described paying for bullet holes to be covered in walls and body fluid teams to remove blood. The money also went towards counseling, sexually transmitted disease testing, flights, new accommodations, health costs, and more. In one incident, Airbnb paid an Australian woman $7 million for a grape that occurred on New Year's Day in 2016. Airbnb flew the woman's mother to the United States from Australia, flew them home, and offered to pay for health and counseling costs. She received $7 million 2 years later in an agreement that she would not sue Airbnb or the host of the property where she was raped. In another incident, there are so many incidents. In another incident, a woman, Carla, was found passed away near the Airbnb apartment where she was staying in Costa Rica. She was killed by the security guard at the apartment complex. Her family filed suit against Airbnb for not performing a background check on the security guard who had killed her. It transpired that the security guard was working in the country illegally. The suit was settled, but details of the settlement are unknown. So that's one article that's going into this. And again, this is Blake Lively's team member that is going to be putting out a narrative that they want you to believe. Don't forget that. All right, guys, we have another article. This one's a little bit longer, but it has a lot of incredible information to give you insight into what was going on here. This was on Bloomberg.com, and the date. I do not see. There we go. June 15th, 2021. Airbnb is spending millions of dollars to make nightmares go away. When things go horribly wrong during a stay, the company's secretive safety team jumps in to soothe guests and hosts, help families, and prevent PR disasters. I don't know how someone can be backing and supporting Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds when someone that has the ability to sleep at night after doing this on their team to trash Justin and to bring Justin down and to create narratives. And the same person that had the absolute audacity to get mad and try to trash Justin publicly for standing up for himself, right? It was called the abuser's playbook when he filed a lawsuit back and he stood up for himself. He was just supposed to take it. And it meant he was obviously guilty when he hired a PR crisis team. So what does it mean about you in terms of guilt or innocent when you hire a man like this to support you and your team? Blake, we're all waiting for an answer. All right. So this is going into a story. The first floor apartment on West 37th Street, a few blocks south of Times Square, was popular with tourists. So popular that a set of keys was left at the counter of a nearby bodega for Airbnb renters to pick up. That's where a 29-year-old Australian woman and a group of her friends retrieved them. No identification needed when they arrived in Manhattan to celebrate New Year's Eve in 2015. The apartment had been advertised on Airbnb, even though most short-term rentals are illegal in New York. The city, prodded by powerful hotel unions, was at war with the company, which was listing thousands of apartments in the five borough despite some of the strictest regulations in the country. Soon after ringing in the new year, the woman left her friends at the bar where they'd been celebrating and returning to the apartment on her own. And I will just say this article itself, I had just skimmed. So this is the first time going top to bottom with you. She didn't notice anything amiss or see the man standing in the shadows as she walked into the bathroom. By the time she realized she was alone, the blade of a knife was pointing down at her. The stranger grabbed her, shoved her onto the bed, and assaulted her. Drunken revelers were wandering the streets outside, but the woman was too scared to scream. That morning, a call came in. So it's talking about this. The cops were already in the apartment an hour or so later when the man arrived and returned and peered around the doorway. They caught him, emptied his back pocket, pulling out three incriminating items: a knife, one of the woman's earrings, and a set of keys to the apartment. Recognize this name? That morning, a call came in for Nick Shapiro, a former deputy chief of staff at the Central Intelligence Agency and National Security Council advisor in the Obama White House. Shapiro was 2 weeks into a new job as a crisis manager at Airbnb Inc. I remember thinking I was right back in the thick of it, he recalls. This brought me back to feelings of confronting truly horrific matters at Langley and in the Situation Room at the White House. I will say this: no one forced him to take this job. No one forced him to coerce victims into settling. No one forced him to do any of this work. So if he had, he makes it seem like someone forced him into this. Maybe not. Maybe he's just like, oh yeah, I'm so used to it because I was at the White House. But no one forced him to do this job. Shapiro notified other Airbnb executives, including Chief Executive Officer Brian Chesky. Meanwhile, safety agents from the company's elite trust and safety team sprang into action. They relocated the woman to a hotel, paid for her mother to fly in from Australia, flew them both home, and offered to cover any health or counseling costs. The duplicate keys posed a particular problem for the company and a mystery for investigators. How had the man gotten them? Airbnb doesn't have a policy for how hosts exchange keys with guests, and its reputation for safety and possibly its legal liability hinged on the answer. Shapiro, who since left the company, helped coordinate an investigation into the matter. A week later, a staff member who was sent to court to see if Airbnb was mentioned during a proceeding. It wasn't. The local media didn't report on the crime either, despite the lurid details. And the company wanted to keep it that way, despite how horrific this was. PR nightmare, right? The story remained unreported until now, in no small part because 2 years after the assault, Airbnb wrote the woman a check for $7 million, one of the biggest payouts the company has ever made. In exchange, she signed an agreement not to talk about the settlement or imply responsibility or liability on the part of Airbnb or the host. Details of the crime, the company's response, and the settlement were reconstructed from police and court records and confidential documents, as well as from interviews with people familiar with the case. The woman, whose name was redacted in court documents and who asked her lawyer not to be identified, declined to comment. So did her lawyer. Ben Brett, an Airbnb spokesman, says that the company doesn't have the power to keep stories out of the media. Sure. And that despite the wording of the settlement agreement, the woman is able to discuss whether she holds anyone responsible. Sure. He adds that Airbnb's goal following the incident was to support the survivor of a horrific attack and that local political issues had nothing to do with its response. The way Airbnb has handled crimes such as the New York attack, which occurred during a bitter regulatory fight, shows how critical the safety team has been in the company's growth. Airbnb business model rests on the idea that strangers can trust one another, which it does. If that premise is undermined, it can mean fewer users and more lawsuits, not to mention tighter regulations. For all its importance, the safety team remains shrouded in secrecy. Insiders call it the black box. But 8 former members and 45 other current and former Airbnb employees familiar with the team's role, most of whom spoke on condition of anonymity for fear of breaching confidentiality agreements, provided a rare glimpse into its operations and internal struggles. The job, former team members say, is a nerve-wracking one, balancing the often conflicting interests of guests, hosts, and the company. I had situations where I had to get off the phone and go cry, a former agent recalls. That's all I can do. You also do not need to work for a company that does this, that covers up, that funds covering up bullet holes, that funds SA kits. Like, this is ridiculous. We all know that you can't stop everything, but it's all about how you respond. You have to make it right. Airbnb has grown from a funky couch surfing alternative to one of the biggest hospitality companies in the world, with 5.6 million listings, more than a number of rooms in the top 7 hotel chains combined. Its $90 billion market value. The share price has doubled since the company went public in December. And that shows just how much progress the founders have made in wooing investors since their Raymond days. One of the first Silicon Valley venture capitalists they pitched was Chris Seika, an early backer of Instagram, Twitter, and Uber. After their presentation, Seika, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing, later recalled, he pulled them aside and said, "Guys, this is super dangerous. Someone's going to get raped or killed, and the blood is going to be on your hands." He didn't invest. Yep, someone called it from the beginning. From the outset, Airbnb has encouraged strangers to connect online, exchange money, and then meet in real life, often sleeping under the same roof. It's somewhere between a tech platform and a hotel operator, unable to disavow responsibility for ensuring its users are safe, as some tech companies might, or to provide security guards and other on-site staff as a hotel would. It's like a weird gray zone, right? What makes trust and safety at Airbnb more complicated than at Apple or Facebook is that you're dealing with real people in real people's homes, says Tara Bunch, Airbnb's head of global operations. Bunch has overseen the safety team since being hired away from Apple Inc. last May. People are naturally unpredictable. That's your argument? People are naturally unpredictable, and as much as we try, occasionally really bad things happen, she says. We all know that you can't stop everything, but it's all about how you respond by covering it up and paying people off. There you go, fix that. And when it happens, you have to make it right by paying people off and keeping it out of the news. And that's why we try to do each and every time. Do people believe what they say? Do people actually believe this? In the early days, the co-founders answered every customer service complaint on their mobile phones. When that became unmanageable, they hired support staff to field calls. It wasn't until 3 years in, after more than 2 million booked stays, that the company faced its first big safety crisis. In 2011, a host in San Francisco blogged about returning from a work trip to find her home ransacked. Her guests had trashed her clothes, burned her belongings, and smashed a hole through a locked closet door to steal her passport, credit card, laptop, hard drives, as well as her grandmother's jewelry. In a follow-up post, the host wrote that an Airbnb co-founder had contacted her and, rather than offering support, asked her to remove the story from her blog. This is what Airbnb calls making it right. No support. Remove that story immediately. So to remove the story from her blog, saying it could hurt an upcoming funding round. Soon, Ransackgate was trending on Twitter, and the incident snowballed into a crash course in crisis management. The result, a public apology from Chesky, a $50,000 damage guarantee for hosts since increased to $1 million, a 24-hour customer support hotline, and a new trust and safety department. As Airbnb grew, so did the number of dangerous incidents, everything from hosts hurling suitcases out of windows to concealed cameras, gas leaks, SAs, many of the crimes taking place inside short-term rentals listed on its platform, and others could have happened in any apartment or hotel room. But in some cases, hosts use the platforms to commit them. In one October 2011 incident, an Airbnb host in Barcelona plied 2 American women who booked a stay at his home with alcohol and then assaulted them. When the women went to the police the next morning, the host threatened to upload videos of the attack to the internet if they didn't drop the case, according to local media reports. Airbnb, which declined to comment about the case for the story, paid the two women an undisclosed amount and banned the hosts for life. By 2016, the safety team was overwhelmed with calls, many of them minor in nature, and Airbnb started training contractors and call centers around the world to handle the flood of complaints. Only serious problems were transferred to this internal safety team. The team is made up of about 100 agents in Dublin, Montreal, Singapore, and other cities. Some have emergency services or military background. Team members have the autonomy to spend whatever it takes to make a victim feel supported, air quotes, including paying for flights, accommodation, food, counseling, health costs, and sexually transmitted disease tests. A former agent who was at Airbnb for 5 years described the approach as shooting the money cannon. The team has relocated guests to hotel rooms at 10 times the cost of their booking, paid for round-the-world vacations, and even signed checks for dog counseling sessions. We go the extra mile to ensure anyone impacted on our platform is taken care of. We don't really worry about the brand and image component. Sure, that stuff will take care of itself as long as you do the right thing. This is wild. So essentially, the company sees it as we're doing the right thing, we're helping victims. But early investors said that they saw the writing on the wall of what was going to happen with this. And then you hire teams with Nick Shapiro and intelligence officers and emergency response personnel to pay off victims. That's what it is. It's paying off victims. The company declines to comment on terms of settlements or the safety team's budget. But a confidential document seen by Bloomberg Business Week shows that in recent years, Airbnb spent an average about $50 million annually on payouts to hosts and guests, including on legal settlements and damage to homes. Former safety agents also described tension with the trust side of the department, whose job is to develop policies to prevent bad things from happening, whether it's bed bugs, guns, or kidnapping. What? This is wild. Safety agents who clean up only after disaster strikes say that it felt like the unloved side of the department. It goes on to continue saying, in early 2016, after an assault near Times Square, safety agents did what they were trained to do, provide comfort and assistance to the victim. But the possibility of a lawsuit raised the stakes. It just still blows my mind of the audacity Airbnb has to call all of this providing comfort and assistance. And then this situation, well, the possibility of a lawsuit raised the stakes. Chris Lian, a former political operative for President Bill Clinton, had been hired by Airbnb. You don't need these kinds of people if there's no issues in your company. Have been hired by Airbnb as head of global policy and communications a few months before the incident. Company insiders say Lian, the author of Masters of Disaster, a 2014 book about the black art of damage control. Airbnb, I thought all you were doing was providing support to the victims. Why do you need to know the black art of damage control? Was afraid the case could be used by opponents to run Airbnb out of town. The issue with the keys wasn't easily addressed, so it's going back to that story. I mean, the reality is, no matter what we look at here, is they called it looking out for the victims. But the reality is they were paying off victims. And like this goes on and on. This is a long article. And what it says here is the only thing that really motivates Airbnb is a threat of bad PR or a nightmare in the press. The result of all of these settlements, combined with the terms of service provisions that prevent lawsuits in the first place, is that the courts have never established the extent to which short-term rental operators might be liable, if at all, for crimes that take place in the properties they list. The law around these platforms is unclear, Lee says. Everything is getting sent to arbitration, so nobody really knows. Airbnb's desire for secrecy also makes it difficult to understand what impact short-term rentals have on the overall safety of neighborhoods. So they do not care. And Nick Shapiro was a part of this team, don't forget. Blake Lively's new team member. The company doesn't make the addresses of listings public to protect the privacy of its users. And though some US cities require hosts to list their units on short-term rental registries, most don't release the data, citing the same privacy concerns. Those that do often don't disclose apartment numbers, et cetera, et cetera. It's incredibly heartbreaking. And it goes on and on, incident after incident after incident after incident. And this team, that black box team, paid off the families. Another situation, Airbnb subsequently offered to pay for the funerals. And one of the victims, they need to be held accountable for what happened. Hill's mother, Cynthia Taylor, says of Airbnb, "My son's life was taken away at a property they allowed to keep renting on their service after multiple complaints." So this article I will link in the notes if you wanted to go through it. Like I said, it's quite extensive. And this is just something, this Airbnb black box and Nick Shapiro's involvement with it is something that I had noticed last night when I was doing my research. And then today I had decided to dive into it. So this is just a first glance. I know you guys are getting used to those deep dives, and I promise I'm going to keep looking at this. But this is what I've been finding so far. While there's not a ton of articles on it, they all say the same thing. Airbnb has secretive black box team paying out $50 million a year to keep disaster stays out of the press and give staff blank checks to help victims and clean up remains. This article as well reiterates everything that we know so far. And as we saw in the first article, Nick Shapiro was part of this team that was covering this up. So I'm going to keep digging. I'm going to continue looking into this. This is obviously horrific. I believe that I'm actually horrified that this hasn't received more press than it did. I can't believe that there's a few articles here and there, and that's it. It's also interesting to me because if you type in Airbnb or Nick Shapiro black box, you are starting to get trending on Google the articles about Nick Shapiro helping Blake Lively. So I don't doubt it helps push some of this down the algorithm as well. Team members have the power to spend any amount tackling the worst crimes at their rentals, working to keep the incidents out of the public eye. The revelation of the team's existence and its power to keep the worst incidents out of the press raises questions about the scale of shocking incidents taking place at Airbnb properties and the company's ability to ensure safety of its guests and hosts. It's just absolutely wild. All right, my friends, so I'm going to leave it at that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, this is the type of person that was brought in to help Blake Lively with her PR and to help control the narrative and prevent the public from seeing the truth about what is going on in her lawsuits between her and Justin Baldoni. And I will die on this hill. If she had that smoking gun, you do not need to bring a man like this in. And if you are such a proponent of women, do you hire a man whose job it was to pay off victims of SH, to pay off victims of SA, to pay off families who lost their children in these properties, when the original investor had said he wouldn't invest because there'd be blood on their hands? People knew from day one that there were going to be issues with this, and they went forward with it anyway. And Blake brought on someone that worked for them and covered up crimes against women, children, men, everyone. And who also admitted that his time with Airbnb reminded him of the things he covered up for the White House. That's the kind of person Blake Lively brings on her team. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm not done with this. We will keep looking into this. I know you guys are used to the slides and more professionally done and fancy, but today I just wanted to get this out here because I think it's critically important, because I want this video to be ahead of the narrative of what Blake and Ryan are going to be pushing, because I have no doubt someone like this has some dirty shit up his sleeve to throw at content creators, citizen journalists, Justin Baldoni, and Wayfair. So I really want at least this first push of this video so that we can get it out there and make people aware of the kind of people Blake is hiring for her team. Trust no headline in regards to this case, my friends. And I'll see you in the next one.